AC, fuck, marry, kill, your top 3.
Shit. I forgot that was the second part of this question. Shit. I wanted to say that I was going to kill Iceman. I hate Iceman.
And welcome to Can't Let It Go. It's an audio PowerPoint party. My name is Matt, and I use he, him pronouns.
I'm AC. I use they, them pronouns.
And I'm not going to tell you what our topic is today because AC told me that they have a little bit of nonsense that we need to be talking about.
Okay, 1 minute of nonsense. We have mentioned on the show, I think in the past, if you haven't, I hope you have seen online, you know that John Lovett from Pod Save America is on Survivor. He took a hiatus from Pod Save America because he was on Survivor, filming Survivor on deck. Have you seen the videos now that he has re-entered the world?
No, but I do have to say the funniest fucking thing that you sent me after the Trump conviction was the meme of Johnny Fairplay's brother saying and it said, "Who's gonna tell John Lovett?"
It's so funny. They've been recording again and releasing clips on TikTok and other places of him reacting to news. There's a really great clip that I really encourage you to go and watch. I'll send you the link so you can put it in the show notes for our listeners. But where they basically quiz him on headlines and they ask him if it's real or if they made it up. And he just is flabbergasted by some of the things that happened while he was away. And it's so funny. This is something that I would love to see more of on Survivor and honestly just other reality game shows. I don't even know. Do we do A-list, B-list, D-list anymore? People who have large but very niche followings being on reality competition TV is one of just my favorite things.
Yeah.
Because they're weirdly famous, but they're not famous. Anyway, I can't wait to watch him on Survivor. It's
What we're saying is put Brendan and Steven on the Traitors.
Yes, I endorse it. Also, Matt, probably we should say I'm recording from a different place today. So
you are. We have this whole blanket set up that I watched you put together.
There's a desk. I'm recording in a dorm room functionally. And it's pretty echoey in here, so
we did what we could do, and I'll do what I can do in the edit.
Yeah.
Hey, I do want to call out, last week we did our episode on Palestine, and we have a ton of resources still available in the Discord, on the website, if you want to find those, figure out ways that you can help the Palestinian people escape genocide, and also to free Palestine within our lifetime.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, always drop in the Discord if you got questions or, just are looking for those links. We've got them for you. Today, we're going to be talking about X-Men, which is the first topic we ever covered on this show.
Yeah.
I'm glad to talk about X-Men when we have a few laps under us, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And also a ton has happened with X-Men just in the popular zeitgeist and also in our lives since we talked about Krakoa, right?
That comic run happened, right? It came to its finale.
Mm-hmm.
The X-Men 97 show came out. And also, other stuff, right?
Yeah, we're getting Deadpool and Wolverine in July, which should be I'll say the first proper introduction of the X-Men into the MCU. I'm here. Now's the time to lay out a spoiler warning, which is one of the things we want to do. We are going to spoil X-Men 97. And I think there's a smaller audience that might care that we're going to probably spoil the end of Krakoa. In fact, not a probably. I have to talk about that last issue. Also, right now I'm about to spoil some stuff from the Marvels and also Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness.
Perfect.
Which is to say that we saw Professor Xavier in a different universe in Multiverse of Madness, and we also saw Kelsey Grammer's Beast in the post-credits scene in the Marvels.
Yeah.
So we have seen X-Men from like other universes in the MCU, but Deadpool and
Yeah.
Wolverine is going to be the first time that characters are in like the proper, I think the timeline is 19999, which is like the MCU universe.
Yeah.
And the way that they're doing that, at least in the Deadpool and Wolverine movie, is by introducing like the Fox X-Men in some way, which is cool. I'm excited about it. One day we'll do an episode about like media mergers and how they're evil, but it seems cool. I like Marvel.
I mean, I think the thing that's so funny is that at this point, there are like so many mergers in so many different directions that I was trying to, my partner and I were playing a fun game last night while we were watching the last episodes of X-Men 97 before we started, which was how many X-Men can she actually name? And I confused myself on not just who was an X-Men, but like which some of the ones that she was like trying to reference, whether they were DC or Marvel. And I was like, sorry. What I'm thinking of is not the DC Marvel split. I'm thinking of the Sony Pictures Warner Brothers split, and just like, ignore me.
I mean, like, Disney has the rights to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Like,
shut up. Stop. Don't upset me right now, Matt.
Like, we could get a Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like, Shang-Chi crossover if we really wanted
it. Let Buffy the Vampire Slayer wield the Infinity Stones.
Yes.
That's my new pitch.
All right, back on track. We're going to talk about the X-Men today. And I think the biggest thing that's happened, and like the reason that I think I primarily wanted to do this episode is that X-Men 97 came out. And contrary to what you might think from a show that is almost explicitly and like very intentionally nostalgia bait, was incredible.
It was so good. I was totally floored. I was talking about it with some folks after I finished last night. And one of the things that really struck me was that it is an animated show, but it is a grown-up animated show, right? Like where X-Men the Animated Series definitely hits on like some of the like more adult themes, it still does feel like it was intended for like Saturday morning cartoons, right? Maybe Saturday morning cartoons for like 12 to 16-year-olds, but Saturday morning cartoons nonetheless. This show feels like it is both obviously like very, very timely to watch, but also the audience is not children, right? This is a show that is taking on serious topics in the same way that the comics have never shied away from. And I loved every minute of it.
Yeah, it's interesting because that first episode is so... It's the X-Men you know, and it is a shake-up, and it's different and doing cool stuff, but you're like seeing like Gambit charge up Wolverine's claws, and you're seeing Scott like use his blast to like land safely on the ground. I was like, what the fuck are we watching? And then the second episode immediately is like, oh no, we're doing the X-Men thing. We're going to talk about shit. That second episode is called Mutant Liberation Begins. And it happens multiple times, I feel like, in various X-Men stories. But in this one, there's like a very famous scene of Magneto going to the UN that exists in the comics in a different way, right? But in the show, it is... essentially, he's now been asked by Xavier to run the school, and the UN's like, nah, dog, like, you are evil. And I don't know, he basically is like, the things that the X-Men have done, the things that I have done, right, are in service of protecting ourselves. And just has like, it is an episode full of 6 speeches. Like, if you're a West Wing girly, like, you're gonna fucking love this episode.
Well, I am, and I did. We talked about this scene in our first episode on X-Men, and we talked about it, like the frames from the comics and some of like these same themes of like Magneto accepting his role as both like the villain in other people's story and also, you know, the person who feels ultimately like the most responsible for the survival of mutant kind.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting that this show is picking up stories from different eras than X-Men the Animated Series did. Or even like X-Men, like the Bryan Singer movies did, right? Like Bryan Singer was picking up stories that are really classic, like the Phoenix and like Age of Apocalypse. Like that movie's terrible, but it existed. He made it.
I forgot.
Yeah.
I straight up forgot until you just said that.
Actually, I don't know if Bryan Singer was involved in that one, but it's in that lineage of movies. But anyway, those are like early, like Stan Lee or Claremont era stuff, right? Like that's the stuff that often gets adapted from X-Men. And what we see in X-Men 97 is a writing team, which I promise we will talk about the Bona Mayo stuff. There's no way of getting out of it. But we see a team that really, really adores the X-Men and is frankly more current in their reading, right? A lot of this season is directly referencing some stuff that happens in the 2000s, right? Like in the 90s and 2000s. We see stuff from Grant Morrison's run. Episode 5. This is an episode that I think really shook up the perception of X-Men 97 because it tells this really devastating story that we, again, talked about in our first episode, the story of the Genosian Massacre. This episode called Remember It. And you're presented a Genosha that in the show, I think, frankly, is based on Krakoa. Like,
it did seem that way.
Yeah, like I go back and read Genosha in the books, and I'm like, this is not the story you're telling here. And also, like in the animated series, they've been to Genosha before. Like Genosha's been part of the story, and it wasn't this really vibrant place that it is portrayed in this episode. Very clearly, something in this world has changed, but it's building on things like. It's run by a council, and we see Moira, and we see who is Emma Frost, right?
Yeah.
And we see Sebastian Shaw, like all of these council members or primary characters from the Krakoan story that's very clear not there. But fundamentally, the story of the Genosian Massacre is a story from Grant Morrison's run. Now, I have since read the first volume of their run, and it is very popular. It is not for me. I think my take on Grant Morrison is that they like to write stories that are... Actually, here, I'm not going to claim that all their stories are this, but what I found about this story was that it was an attempt to be cool and to be edgy, frankly. And that's maybe what the X-Men needed at that time. But what it misses, and I think what Grant Morrison misses in writing it that way, is any meaningful lead up to some really like devastating stuff.
Yeah.
The page that it's a single page that the Genosian Massacre happens on, and it's a really cool page. You're watching like the X-Men basically watch this number tick down of, mutants alive on Genosha, but you don't ever see the thing happen. There's a couple pages before you see some sentinels fly off that Cassandra Nova has sent. But the thing that the episode did when we were presented this like paradise, right? That people were choosing to like stay there because they, didn't expect it to be this grand. Like everyone's making these really monumental decisions based on this like incredible place. And then this like kaiju sentinel shows up and like fully murders everyone.
Yeah.
It's way more emotional because you are given these little character moments. I think everyone thinks a lot about Gambit, right? But the one that hits for me, and people talk about this one too, is Magneto and Leech, where he's very clearly protecting Leech, who, reminder, a couple episodes before, he has essentially said, like, you have a home, like, you're safe here, we'll take care of you in the Morlocks, and now they're on Genosha, and he's doing what he can to protect him. And you see Magneto be, I think, the best that Magneto gets to be in this moment. And the last episode we did this, we talked about how Magneto really is a bad guy. He's done a lot of bad shit and like deserves to be held accountable for it. But I do understand the desire to say like Magneto was right because you compare it to the actions of Xavier and you say Xavier is not doing enough to protect his people, right?
Yeah.
He is protecting the people he can in his mansion in Westchester and making their lives safe and only caring about them. But Magneto is taking more action because he actually cares about the fate of mutant kind. I can get that. That makes sense
Yeah.
to me. Magneto is right as a popular like thing that people say because of Grant Morrison's run, right? But has shown up a lot just like on social media in recent years because of people's disappointment with Democrats, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think, right, and the show, the arc overall, like, really doesn't shy away from that, right? I think there are two things that immediately come to mind. One, even harder for me than the scenes with Magneto and Leech in the Genosha Massacre are in the final episodes when Magneto has essentially lost his own mind because Xavier has just like brain blasted him to get him to restore the magnetic pulse of the earth, I guess.
Yeah.
That part's I gotta not think about too much.
Last couple episodes get a little messy.
Yeah, but you know, when he is in this very fragile sort of, you know, disconnected state, the thing that he says is, I promised a young boy he would be safe, and I couldn't keep him safe, right?
Right.
And that seems to be this big cornerstone for him of like, he feels that he has failed utterly, right? And he feels and carries the weight of all of the other times that he has failed and people have died because of his actions, right? So like, I think it's an interesting moment to like, it humanizes him without absolving him, even in X-Men 97, right? And I think that there are a number of different X-Men writers who have done this successfully over time. This, for me, was one of the most successful of humanizing Magneto without absolving him of his actions. And I also really, really liked that they gave the screen time to play out the moments of division and who is falling in line with Magneto is right versus who is falling in line with Xavier is right, right? And like to talk that through. Rogue, you know, being consumed by grief and rage for the loss of Gambit, right? Hunting down Trask, hunting down Bolivar, but also when Magneto gives her the opportunity saying, I'm going with him again.
Right.
Because he is right. You know, she's chosen Magneto a number of times she chooses him a number of times in X-Men 97, but also like in many other X-Men stories. But here, you know, what I thought was really, really interesting and careful was how successful and balanced it was, in that not only the angry and, you know, embittered characters were the ones who chose to go with Magneto, and, you know, getting the dialogue between Jubilee and Roberto is like such a sad moment of like Jubilee being like, I'm here, but I'm staying on this side, and would you stay with me, right?
Yep.
And I like that, you know, it's still a half-hour format. We still don't get like the most resolution we could, but I did like that the show chose not to leave those things unresolved, or not to leave those relationships unhealed at the end. And that feels very like comic book in a good way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just have to call out that I love that we got Sunspot, Roberto, in this series. So I've actually watched a lot of random X-Men stuff recently. I finally watched the new Mutants, that movie that was supposed to be like horror adjacent that came out in 2020 that bombed and like no one saw and apparently everyone hated. I was like really taken aback by how not bad it was. Like,
interesting.
It's not great, but it's not like, I don't know, it's not Apocalypse, right? Like, it's not Dark Phoenix. I actually really enjoyed a lot about it. Now, to be fair, I love Magic. She's one of the main characters. I don't love her characterization in that movie, but whatever. But yeah, I loved about the show getting to see different aspects of X-Men that we don't get to see. Getting to see not necessarily new stories, but stories that don't get told. And one of the reasons that we got to see that is because of Bo DeMeo. And at this point, I feel like everyone who cares about X-Men 97 knows what happened here, like, or at least knows that it happened, that Bo DeMeo was fired like a week before the show came out. It was characterized as being fired. It would later be characterized as like not that, but also not the normal language that we hear about like separating for creative differences, just quote, like not characterized as a firing. It was real sketchy. I was really excited because Beau DeMayo is a gay black man that is like really proudly sexual and kinky and was out there like making a popular Marvel thing, right? Like that's awesome. And to see him fired, I was immediately skeptical. And I wrote this on my blog, but stuff has come out about this to the point that it's like enough people have said about Beau that his behavior on the Witcher set was abusive, and my instinct is to until and unless we know anything else, just assume that it was valid and worth it. And I think that there's this tendency that, I don't know, started back with Star Trek really, but I think in like our lifetimes was popularized around Firefly, for the fandom to like, I don't know, get together and organize to get something back the way that we want it. And I think there are people out there who are trying to like build that story for Beau DeMayo to get him back on the writing team. And we just don't know. We don't know enough. Like Disney could have fired this man because he had a OnlyFans, right?
Sure.
But as far as I can tell, they would have known that before they hired him. He wasn't exactly hiding it, and it existed before they started working on the show. So I don't know. It's clear to me that he likes some things about X-Men that previous like adaptations creators haven't enjoyed, at least.
Yeah. I mean, I think that for all that we talk on this show about like transparency and insight and accountability, like at some point, you know, we also don't have to know.
Yeah,
right?
we don't have to know.
Like and I do, I mean, I like to know if the people who create the things that I love and am recommending to people are not great people. Like I like to reevaluate that. But it's also like in such a diverse and complex media landscape, and I mean that in the diversity of the types of people who can create content, the types of people who have power, and like the complexity of the ways that certain people wind up in these scenarios, or like the complexity just of like you can make a mistake in acting badly, right? And like, or like be on a path to trying to right yourself and not quite there yet, right? Like we're all also people, I guess is just what I'm trying to say. We're just like people, and people are messy, and that's hard. But yeah, I don't know. I think for all of that, X-Men 97 is maybe my favorite like Marvel property to come out since WandaVision.
Yeah, I would agree. And I'm not one of these people that is like totally turned off by the MCU lately. I think there's been bad stuff, but like I really fucking enjoyed the Marvels. I had a great time. I'm glad I bought a ticket to go see that movie.
I really like the Marvels. I really like Shang-Chi. I sort of got the Loki show. I don't think I actually
The second
got it.
season is actually not as good as the first one, but anyway, that's to say, I agree with you on X-Men 97. I think it's the best thing that they've made since WandaVision. And I will say, WandaVision's a show that I've rewatched twice.
It's so good.
Incredible. I want to see this energy brought into more things. What I don't want is for like everything to be samey and all that. That's not what I'm asking for. What I want is people who are passionate. If we're going to be redoing things, let's bring in people who are passionate about them enough to find the stuff that's actually interesting, right? Like, I don't know, Thor 4. I don't hate this movie as much as other people do, but I do think it's maybe the second worst Thor movie. Thor 2 is pretty bad.
It's really bad.
But like, we need a big Thor fan making Thor movies.
Yeah.
Right?
And we got Thor Ragnarok, and it is the best Marvel movie. Well, okay, other than Into the Spider-Verse, maybe.
Okay, yeah.
Right? But like, it shows, right?
Yeah.
Like Taika Waititi loves these properties, and it shows in the way that he makes the movies.
Yeah, and I think in the second one, they just like leaned so hard into the stuff that like was just right and didn't need any more in Love and Thunder. And, whereas Beau comes in clearly with this experience with X-Men that like people haven't seen because we haven't been given the opportunity to outside of comic books, and says like, actually, this part's interesting. Like, you know what would be interesting is if we took Bastion, this character that's like in a run of X-Men that frankly is like right before a very popular one.
Yeah.
Right. And we took him, and actually there's this thing about the real world right now that would make him the best villain. The fact that Tolerance is Extinction is the name of those last 3 episodes and is the theme, right, of those last 3 episodes. The idea of putting the Great Replacement theory and the way that has been popularized again, right, in recent years into an X-Men story is just like, sorry, Omega level writing, right? It is like an incredible ability to look at decades of something and say, that's the one.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and even too, right? The story with Aurora, with Storm, losing her powers and then having to go. So, Life Death Part 2 specifically for me, I have been like going through it lately, right? Like, and having a really hard time. And so I had just been in like a sort of like setback moment with some of the stuff that I've been dealing with when I watched Life Death Part 2. And so it just like hit really hard for me and is my favorite episode from this run based on just like my emotional memories of the episodes so far. But I think like too, putting Storm front and center, putting, Cable and Bishop in the story, putting Forge much more front and center, right? Like intentionally choosing not just stories, but also X-Men who haven't gotten their moments, Sunspot, right? As the center player characters, right? As central to these stories. And one of the things that I noticed, I mean, it's always been true that like X-Men is one of the most diverse Marvel properties in terms of like the idea that anyone can be a mutant, and therefore, right, we get these moments of telling more interesting, more far afield stories of people from more marginalized communities. But usually, it's the gang. It's it's Wolverine and Rogue and
it's the hot ones.
Yeah. And Jean Grey and Scott Summers, in the center of the story. And X-Men 97 really successfully gave us great stories about those characters without making them the like centerpiece, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you said that about how like there's this thing about X-Men where anyone can be a mutant. And again, having read some of Grant Morrison's run, and also I want to call out the podcast Girl Mode. They did an episode about New X-Men, which was Grant Morrison's run on X-Men. And Willa and Robin have an incredible conversation about that. And it taught me that a lot of the things that I like about X-Men are actually from Grant Morrison, even though I don't like their writing that much. And one of the things that I really love is this idea of mutants who don't have cool superpowers. Right? Mutants who are mutants because they have wings that don't do anything. Mutants who are, mutants because they can shoot bubbles out of their fingers, you know? Like stuff that makes you different, that still makes you oppressed in this world, right? But that doesn't make you one of the main characters. And they really created this idea that like that's probably most mutants. And because of that, created the idea of mutant culture, which was not really a thing that existed. You'll probably have some caveats if you have read more X-Men than me, but for the most part, Grant Morrison invented that concept. And that directly leads to the stuff that I loved in Krakoa, right?
Yeah.
So to see that stuff get represented in the show, especially as Krakoa was ending, I was like, oh man, this is the shit that I'm here for.
Yeah, I mean, my one take, it could have been more gay, but that's
when things can always be more gay.
Just let Magneto and Professor Xavier kiss, please. They love each other so much.
Yes. That episode was kind of gay, though.
It was. I thought they were going to kiss. I thought it was going to finally happen.
Yeah. Oh, man. It's going to be so hard for me to not just talk about all of the Fox X-Men movies. But
they should have kissed for sure.
The way that like the First Class and Days of Future Past, like that set of characters, like that Magneto and that Professor X should have just like, there should have been like a softcore porn.
Listen, putting James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender into the same movie and not letting them kiss as like these two characters specifically was homophobic.
Yes.
And I'm sticking to that. It's Pride Month, so you can't check me on that.
Oh God, in a video I put on the YouTube channel at the beginning of the month, I said it's homophobic to tell me I'm bad at Elden Ring. Oh man.
God.
So that's X-Men 97. I'm sure that we'll end up talking about it more throughout this episode and more throughout this show. But the next thing that we have coming up very soon, next month, is Deadpool and Wolverine. Have you seen the Deadpool movies?
Yes. Yeah, I have.
How do you feel about them?
I enjoyed them. They were fine. Deadpool's not my favorite superhero, but I love a superhero action movie. Mm-hmm. And I guess it feels weird to call Deadpool a superhero. He has a whole complex about that. Yeah. I don't know. I think they were fun. I liked how campy they were. I think like to the point of like I enjoyed Thor Ragnarok a lot because it did not shy away from the fundamental camp that is a big part of comics, period. Yes. Even the serious ones.
Yeah, so this is my point about Deadpool and Wolverine. MCU, to a lot of people, is faltering right now, right? Like, the MCU people are, like, not as interested in it. I'll give you my quick opinion. I think it's because they released too much at one time, and people got tired of it, and it was all on TV, so now people are trained to watch things at home, and so they don't go to the theaters, and that's how the business makes money. Even if we could build a different, like, business model where that's not the case. I actually don't think that it has anything to do with the quality of the movies, and people often overrate the early MCU movies and think they are better than they were.
Yeah.
End of point. But anyway, Deadpool and Wolverine's coming out. You will find many an annoying Instagram comment, which for some reason, it's Instagram comments on Marvel Studios that I still subject myself to.
Don't read the comments, Matt.
It's just Instagram Marvel Studios. Rule. I don't know why. But there's all these annoying comments that are just people convinced that Deadpool's going to save the MCU. Fuck yeah, man. And it's like, just like people who like haven't realized that being an edgelord is like not cool.
Ryan Reynolds is going to save the MCU.
Yeah, exactly.
Listen, I can't go too hard on Ryan Reynolds because I enjoy him as an actor, but also like, no.
Yeah. I am excited for this movie. I also enjoyed the first two Deadpool movies. Like, they go like a little too hard. You know me in comedy. Yeah. Not usually a big fan. They go a little too hard into that for me sometimes, but I like them. They make me laugh sometimes. Like, I love a crude joke, right?
Yeah.
And I love the idea of the Fox X-Men or the animated series X-Men, however it ends up being, showing up in the MCU. That sounds rad. I am so tired of Wolverine being the X person.
Yeah, literally give Rogue a movie, maybe. Give Gambit a movie. Yeah.
Gambit and Rogue would sell so many tickets.
That would be an incredible movie. Talk about a love triangle with Magneto. Like,
put it in Louisiana.
Oh my God. Give it a real, oh my God, a True Blood style series about Gambit and Rogue would slay so hard.
Oh man, like make it gay and like frankly make it gay and black because put it in Louisiana and like that would fucking rule.
That would be so good.
That'd be an incredible. We just made a great movie.
Call us up studios, we'll get it.
So I say all this like I'm skeptical of like the like nature of the product of Deadpool and Wolverine, but I am excited about it. I'm really happy that it's coming out. Really happy to go watch it, and I think like this gets at like the thing that is like almost the point I want to make with the episode, which is that people keep coming back for the X-Men. And the reason I think that people keep coming back is that they're grounded, right? They are grounded in that mutant metaphor that we've talked about so many times. But they commit to the bit with the superhero stuff so hard. Yeah. Like, no one is, well, maybe some people are, but no one's writing an X-Men anything and being like, these guys have to be so serious. Actually, Bryan Singer's entire team was doing that. So I rewatched, if you can't tell, I rewatched the 2000 X-Men movie and X2 like yesterday and the day before. And the thing I came away with was those movies are much worse than I remember. Although X2 is still the best of them and still has some really sick scenes.
That's true. Have you watched Logan?
I have seen Logan. I haven't watched it again because it's
Okay.
rough.
Logan is also one of those that's like, it's trying to be too serious.
Yeah. I love that movie, but yeah, it's doing a very specific story.
Yeah.
And I think only works because it's good.
Sure.
Like it's in the other case, like you can do a serious X-Men story, but it's really got to be perfect.
Yeah.
But the easy way to make X-Men good is like to commit to the bit.
Yeah.
Right?
100%.
They can be all about confronting oppression. They can be about queerness. They can be about standing against racism. And also they got to be superheroes.
Yeah.
Because if they're not that, then frankly, I think like the world just kind of doesn't make sense.
Right.
Right? Like the world doesn't make sense enough for those metaphors to land. And then you end up, I'm going to keep talking on Apocalypse. You end up with that movie.
Yeah. I mean, it's fair to keep dogging on Apocalypse. Let's be honest.
Yeah. I think, I don't know. I think the mutant metaphor also fits our real lived sort of expanding and restricting freedoms.
Yeah.
But also explains why we come back in these cycles to stories like this. Some other stuff has happened to jump into the comics. And one of those things that's happened is, AC, you read House of X and Powers of 10.
I read House of X.
It's the same book.
Great.
The book that you
I read both of them.
Yeah.
Yes, I read House of X and Powers of 10.
I know that the
Incredible.
edition you bought has them interleaved
Super
together.
Great.
What do you think?
Yeah, incredible. Stunning art. I will say that I did have a little bit of trouble tracking the story the first time. So I did have to reread the first half of the book after I figured out, like, I got to the point where I was like, I understand what Moira is doing here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I understand how the Moira timeline works within the larger story. I think like the hardest thing for me was like the very far future and the very near present happening at the same time. I was like, my brain it's not clicking. It's not working.
It's told like a Christopher Nolan movie.
Boy, is it.
Yeah.
But I really, really enjoyed it. And I think that, you know, to not belabor some of the themes that we talked about, but you know, the queerness of it, the found family of it, but also the like way that, and I mean, I suppose this is sort of true of all X-Men stories. Certainly it's true of X-Men 97, maybe not all, many X-Men stories, is the way that it doesn't shy away from like grief and the different ways that grief shows up for different people, I thought was incredible. And I just did eventually really start to love and enjoy the moment where Moira shows up and in Charles's life and says, you know me, you've known me, you've known me over and over again. Look into my mind, see that I know you. And like getting to like the way that is like replayed over and over again as this keystone moment in the story is really, I think it scratches that itch of like, if you like time travel stories like I do, the paradox of it all, right? It just says there is no paradox here. This is intentional. It is on purpose. She is doing this over and over again. And she has realized like that her power isn't just reincarnation. It is influencing time.
Her power is the memory.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
That's the interesting thing. You said something here about like that book not being afraid to embrace grief. I think of I think it's her sixth. Maybe it's the ninth one, but like the one where she's murdered by Wolverine at the end on purpose. Yeah. Right. To reset the timeline. That to me is the characters don't really experience the grief, but like you know what has led up to that moment, and when you find out what it is and why it happened, it's this like gut punch is maybe morbid considering how it goes down, but you know, like that's how I feel about it. Right. Yeah. Reading that story. Man, Moira really goes some places in the Krakoan story that maybe we can talk about. But I do want to say, like, that grief also is set up in that book with some of the data pages. So if you've never read these books, it's important to say that many of the pages in these books are not your traditional comic book page, like art and lettering and all of that. They are what it sounds like, data pages. They're more graphic design. Tom Muller did the graphic design on basically for the whole era. He does incredible work. And then of course people at Marvel, like, and some of the creators also worked with the stuff that he had made to make these. And so it'll be like, I don't know, Hickman explaining different levels of societies, right?
Yeah.
All the way up to this concept called a dominion, which is several different layers up in the idea of an entity.
Yeah. Consciousness conglomerates.
Yes,
like,
exactly. Like you're getting like weird shit.
Yeah.
Some of my favorites are the visuals of Moira's lives.
Yeah.
You're seeing them kind of parallel to each other and where they restarted and what she did to go back. And you get peeks into lives that you don't ever see drawn out in art, right? Just on these timelines that are spread across multiple pages. It's really cool. Again, that gets really messy later in the story. No, later in the story past what you've read. They do this thing called Sins of Sinister, which I won't bother explaining, but Mr. Sinister creates what's called the Moira engine, where he has like thousands of each of the 10 lives versions of Moira and can like reset. And there's like many universes. It makes things way more confusing. And eventually, like in the last book, they just draw a circle. They call it the Moira engine. And then it comes out because they're just not trying to explain it anymore.
That's so funny. I think that is actually maybe one of like my biggest and most true critiques about Mr. Sinister, which is that I just can't ever understand what's happening when he's in any story. It's so big brained. And I actually had this experience recently when reading a sci-fi book. So I love sci-fi. I mean, it's not a surprise to anybody listening to this show, but there's some of it that I just like, I don't know. It feels like my imagination just isn't big enough to comprehend it, right? And like, it's not that I haven't like I've engaged with some like theoretical physics texts. I've learned about string theory and expanding universes and all of that kind of stuff fascinates me. But like the Mr. Sinister, even in this rewatch or even in this watch of like X-Men 97, I was trying to like remind myself like and the master mold and the like how it all links together back to Sinister and the copying of Jean Grey's DNA and Madeline and all of that. I was just like, I just need to not think about how Sinister is doing any of this.
Yes. The thing about that is that you're getting two of the most confusing parts of the X-Men just combined into one, which I think the way they got away with it was to say, we got Mr. Sinister doing DNA shit, and also we got Jean and the Phoenix, which is like really confusing and will come up in this episode here in a second. But those data pages lay out, there's one really prominent one that sticks out in my mind where they lay out the various mutant genocides, which we talked about in the last episode we did. That was how I learned about the Genoshan massacre. That's like that was my exposure to it. Like I said, I've since read stuff. But it's also, they do this thing where they're describing mutant circuits, the idea of mutants working together to build a circuit out of their shared, like the synergy of their powers. And this is the thing that makes them discover resurrection, that they have this capability. But because it's a mutant circuit and it's done by 5 people, it's super slow. And so there's this like line of millions of mutants. If the story of X-Men is of genocide, it's going to take far more years to restore the mutant population than it took to murder them. Yeah. And so what's really cool is in the books, like after House and Powers, it really sets up this, like the sort of bureaucracy of it. We built the thing, now what? And like, I don't know, in House and Powers, they immediately like set up a prison, like super prison, right? But like, I think it's really interesting, those stories being willing to say like, yeah, we can fight and resist, and what comes after may not be perfect.
Foucault was right.
Hey, maybe you could do an episode on Foucault for me.
Do you want me to explain the Foucault was right joke to you? Okay,
yes.
Okay. So Foucault and a few other philosophers and theorists around his time basically say like, you cannot actually create I'm going to use some words here and know that I do not mean this in this way. Like liberation is a myth basically because you cannot. Foucault says that you can only recreate like your experience, right? Like because your brain is influenced, your thoughts are influenced by the society that you are raised in, you will never be able to do anything other than reproduce that in a slightly different way. And so I think like This is my Foucault was right.
Yeah. So I want to put a pin in that because we have a
great.
Q&A coming up, and there's a really good question that I want to address. I actually think I've got it as the last question that we'll talk about on the episode.
Perfect.
I've already talked about me reading New X-Men, but the other thing I did was that I read the end of the Krakoan story. I want to call out one thing. Marvel is now referring to the Krakoan era, as we called it, and as has been called a long time, as, quote, the first Krakoan age.
Oh.
They have very explicitly been like, I don't know, maybe we'll come back to this someday, in the way that comics do, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's very clearly like them just like setting up like, hey, this doesn't have to be the end. Some writer might want to use this.
You liked that.
Yeah.
We might do that again.
We sold a lot of comics. And we don't do that very often.
Yeah.
So Krakoa has ended. I think I was fearful of its end at the end of that first episode. And I'll say I fucking loved the ending.
I love that.
I have gripes. I have many gripes, and especially the lead up. I think we talked about Fall of X in that episode. Yeah. Fall of X was very messy, and the thing that came after it was sort of a mirror story to House and Powers called Fall of the House of X and Rise of the Powers of 10. And those stories I actually liked. Fall of the House of X was basically the conclusion to all the people we need to beat up, right?
Yeah.
Like now on Earth, like very typical superhero stuff. Like how do we, maybe some politics involved, like how do we take down Orcus, this essentially like political movement turned organization. But Rise of the Powers of 10 was more like Powers of 10. We're dealing with like the kind of cosmic aspect of what's gone wrong. Deep spoilers here. So if you're like reading this stuff, just fair warning. So House and Powers is where like they kill Nimrod. Moira has gone bad halfway through the series. It's complicated. She loses her powers. Destiny and Mystique and Cypher, Doug Ramsey. I don't remember which one of them, but one of them removes her powers. And then she finds out that by staying in a no place, which is like this place outside of space and time within Krakoa, she has developed cancer and is dying. And so she like works to put her consciousness into a robot body, and she becomes this like bad robot. But now she's on the side of the AI that have been trying to kill mutant kind and humankind, right? That's like the central conflict of House and Powers is AI versus organic, life. Then like at the end, it's all about like, can we solve this without totally resetting things, right? Because they find that like Krakoa mattered enough, right? A lot of it is about like Xavier continuing to go worse and worse, and him at one point he wants to go back in time and like kill Moira 10 right before her powers manifest. And decides not to do that. So it's about them eventually having to like convince her, she ends up being like a kind of a linchpin, and they end up having to convince her to kind of not be a good guy, but like meet her own needs, right?
Yeah, interesting.
Rise of the Powers of 10 is, I think, the more interesting aspect because it involves, if you don't like Mr. Sinister stuff, sorry. Because the end of Krakoa is all about Mr. Sinister.
It's not that I don't like him. It's just that I get confused.
I also get confused. I'm going to try really hard to not go deep into this. There's really only one aspect I want to talk about, and I don't know how to talk about it without giving you this context.
Okay.
There's 4 major Sinister clones. They all have different names. You don't need to know anything about them. They kind of run shit. It's involved with Sins of Sinister, like I was talking before. They're all fighting, trying to themselves become a dominion, right? They're just trying to become God, essentially.
Each of the Sinisters.
Each of the Sinisters.
Okay.
One of them gets there and finds that she cannot become a dominion. Yes, it's important, but it's also not important.
Okay.
Finds that she cannot because a secret 5th Sinister has already done this, and it was the original Nathaniel Essex, the original guy who cloned himself, and one of those clones was Mr. Sinister.
Okay.
So they call this Dominion, the Dominion formerly known as Nathaniel Essex, Enigma.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm back with you.
Yeah.
I know Enigma.
Yes. So Enigma is, honestly, what Enigma is doing is like kind of vague. Like the badness of Enigma is like wishy-washy.
It's an enigma?
Yeah. It's basically he's trying to prevent the timeline from continuing past Krakoa and like wants to subsume all life and, be one of the cool kids with the dominions. They exhaust all options to prevent a lot of this from happening, especially because Dominions exist out of space and time. So they can't like go back in time and solve this.
Right.
So this thing happens. All this setup is going somewhere. Oh, I realized we didn't even talk about the Hellfire Gala in the last episode. I'm not going to set up the Hellfire Gala. They have these huge balls. They call them Hellfire Galas.
Yes.
And in the third Hellfire Gala, they've just voted on the new X-Men, which is a thing they do while they're in Krakoa. And right when they're starting to celebrate, like literally Nimrod like drops from the sky like an orbital laser and like on top of all of the new X-Men and murders them. Yeah. And then like Orcus and the AIs and everything come and they basically like murder a bunch of people and then force all of the mutants through the gates. And they're doing it with like psychic abilities and stuff like that. In a Grant Morrison story, Xavier taught a bunch of his students to resist those kind of attacks. They have the red triangle. It's like the letters RESIST in a triangle. So some of them resist it. So that's how like characters survive for you to watch for the next year. But everyone goes through these gates and all of the psychics are like, I can't detect them anymore. And they realize that they've all been killed by going through these Krakoan gates. What's revealed in the series X-Men Forever, which is like a little 4-part story, is that they've actually not died. Questionable. They've gone to the White Hot Room, which is in X-Men stories essentially like the mutant afterlife.
Yeah.
But it's also the place where the Phoenix is reborn. It incubates there, it is rebirthed there, and then the Phoenix exists outside of space and time. And it is also the most powerful thing that the X-Men kind of like have to use as a weapon.
Right.
The Phoenix is Jean Grey. Jean Grey is the Phoenix, but they are not the same.
They're not the same.
Right. All of this, all the above. And also the books, as well as Rise of the Powers of 10, introduce this concept that the Phoenix is not just Jean Grey. The Phoenix is all mutants, which explains better why the White Hot Room is the mutant afterlife. And in this story, you might remember the Krakoa is 2 islands. There's a smaller Atlantic island, and the Atlantic island gets taken to the White Hot Room. So they discover Atlantic Krakoa here, and they begin to live on Atlantic Krakoa. Some of them manage to escape to like make it to the big fight in Fall of the House of X, but it's like they call them like the fighting mutants. And the last page of X-Men Forever is these mutants who are left behind, like hundreds of thousands of mutants, trying to figure out how they're going to survive in this place with like limited food and figuring out like what their version of Krakoa is going to be. And this kid named Kafka, he has wings. He just kind of says like, hey, everyone, like they're kind of fighting. He's just like, shut up. We got to figure this out.
Yeah.
And that's the last you see of them. This book ends. I'm horrified.
Yeah.
Like you've taken all of the 5, all of the resurrection is gone. Hope sacrifices herself to rebirth the Phoenix, which if you don't know, Hope Summers has this whole thing about being the mutant messiah. And this is really like the culmination of that story.
Yeah.
And the other 4 are stuck here. So like resurrection is never becoming a thing again. They do start resurrecting people within the White Hot Room, but they're stuck in the White Hot Room. Right?
Yeah, damn.
So they leave this all behind. Okay, we are finally to the last issue of Krakoa. Uncanny X-Men number 700. That is a legacy number. I'm not going to tell you what a legacy number is. This is actually X-Men number 35.
Thank you, Matt. Perfect.
So you now know the whole status. The fights are over. Everyone has won. This book is entirely about what comes next. It's very clear politically that like things are not going to be okay for the mutants. But the one beat that I want to talk about in this story is that there's this panel. It's like something amazing is happening on Krakoa, and you see Krakoa go from the kind of lush like forest area that you've seen it be to this like beautiful kind of solar punk like city almost. What happens is that all of the mutants that have stayed around are introduced to an older Kafka who comes through the gates with thousands of other mutants and explains that for them, they've been existing outside of space and time. It hasn't been days, it's been 15 years. And they have built a society that is not based in violence. that is not based in carceral systems, but instead their quiet council, he says, chooses to listen rather than speak or act. The page, AC, that had me crying is basically he's kind of describing what, he calls New Krakoa has done. He kind of basically does like and one more thing. And they all turn to the gates. And Emma Frost's face, I want to say Phil Noto, incredible artist. He only knows how to draw one face, but incredible artist. Just like gets the point across just so incredibly deeply. They notice that in this 15 years that they've had, they have figured out how to keep doing resurrection. He says something like, Hope Summers was gone, but like hope exists in the White Hot Room. And they find a way, basically, like they didn't need her powers because something about the place where the Phoenix was, like, let them do it without her. And they have spent 15 years resurrecting every mutant that was ever killed, including the 15 million mutants who were killed on Genosha.
Oh, wow.
I am like, they're like pouring through like several gates in this image, and I am like weeping.
Yeah,
like,
wow.
I could not have asked for a better resolution to that part of the story. One of the things that tracks throughout the entire story is like they get slight upgrades on their resurrection, right? So at first it's this really slow process. There's a priority. If you're really important, you might skip the queue.
Yeah.
They find out if they're murdered in this place called Otherworld. Doesn't matter. They like don't come back right? So they're not the same person.
Yeah.
Rockslide gets killed in Otherworld, and they resurrect him, and he comes back as a character who identifies himself as Wrongslide. It's a mean. It's actually really emotional. It's a mean joke that people call him, but he takes it on as an identity.
Oh.
Like he's like, I don't know, fuck him. Like,
Yeah.
I am Wrongslide. I'm not Santo. I'm not Rockslide.
Yeah.
And eventually, Captain Britain, Betsy Braddock, finds a way to bring back people that were lost in Otherworld. At one of the Hellfire Galas, Scarlet Witch kind of boosts all of their resurrection abilities to include all of the people who didn't have Cerebro backups with her magic, and it kind of changes her from this character who they call the Pretender. I don't remember what they call her, maybe the Savior or something like that, but essentially it changes her status with mutant kind. And so they get all these upgrades, but it's still this really slow process that requires these 5 exact people. And this idea that like we've seen all of the wrong done to mutant kind undone in like 2 or 3 pages, and frankly in a way that was led up to. This is one of my gripes with Grant Morrison, in like they murdered them on a single page without hardly any lead up and not much follow up, and we get a full era of build up to these 2 or 3 pages of them coming back, and like the importance of that thrilled me.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And Kafka basically says like, hey, we came back for 24 hours. We've built our society. We're comfortable. We don't need the old Krakoa. We came to join these 2 halves of Krakoa. Let people go where they want. If they want to stay with us, they can. If they want to go home, that's fine. If people here want to come with us, that's also okay. I mean, the same kind of Krakoan amnesty that was given at the beginning of these stories. And 24 hours later, they leave. Like, Krakoa blips out of existence in this like beautiful panel. Oh my God, I almost have to show it to you. I have it right here. This is going to be great audio content, but hey, maybe this will be the cut that we put on TikTok.
Oh, wow. Look at that color.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
I'm just going to read some of this text. So it says, and out on the Pacific, the X-Men waited. They're all standing on like one of Iceman's kind of like islands or whatever. It says it's the last time, or Cyclops says it's the last time I'll ask Kurt, but how stands Krakoa? And he says, ready for the next adventure, Scott, wherever it may lead. And then this is not attributed to anyone, but it's as the last rays of the setting sun touched the living island, it shimmered as if in a heat haze and began to rotate like some vast glittering jewel, moving facet by facet through a direction that cannot be expressed or pointed to. To this day, those who saw it cannot describe it, only that it was beautiful, the most beautiful dream. Storm is weeping in this picture. I can't. A dream that was for a moment real and shone with infinite love and care as it shifted beyond dreams into higher reality. And what does that look like? What does it look like when a dream moves on without you? So ended the first Krakoan age. Ugh.
Talk about themes of grief.
Yeah.
What does it look like when a dream moves on without you is like, I mean, I think, fundamentally a part of grief that doesn't get talked about a lot, right? I think, there are more and more conversations happening now, especially in like queer spaces and like neurodiverse and disability spaces, right? About the different types of grief that we experience. It is not just the death of a loved one that can create a grieving process for a person, but like grieving a dream that you had, grieving a person that you used to be, grieving a person that you wanted to be, right? That's really touching. I think that that's such a, even without having read it, feels like such a like fitting and clear end, because I also think that like there is part of it that like the dream left not realized was in some ways realized for different people, right? Yeah. Different people were able to ultimately have the agency to choose the future that they wanted for themselves.
Yes.
And I think that that's like such a core value of the X-Men stories, right? Is like the agency of people, of people, the agency of mutants specifically, right? That's just like a really, that makes me more excited to read it when I do get to it,
Well, we talked last time, right, about freeing Palestine and how it is a project that takes a long time. And I think we've seen this in queer existence as well. The idea that I am fighting for myself, sure, but I'm also fighting for the future of queer people on the planet, right? Yeah. So again, the metaphor is working for me.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I don't know. It's beautiful.
I'm genuinely really excited to read it. I have a couple of the like smaller books from the lead up to this run that I bought after I read House of X and Powers of 10. And so it's on my radar. I'm headed to the used bookstore later this week, in fact, to try to hunt out some additional materials. But
yeah. So I will say I did write a guide just for listeners on how I called it how to read the Krakoan or the X-Men's Krakoan era without losing your mind, because it is impossible to navigate, and I sure did take 1.5 years to do it and figured that out.
There are a lot of time loops.
There are a lot of weird like ways that they decide to put the story together, and knowing what you have to read and what you don't. My opinion on most things, you don't have to read anything. I think you'll sometimes you'll be confused, and like sometimes that's okay, but most of the time you'll get the context you need.
Sometimes I've read everything and I'm still confused.
Exactly. Don't do what I did. Don't read everything. I'll link that blog in the show notes for you to check out. I think it's time to move on to some questions.
Yeah.
We asked y'all on Threads and on Instagram and in the Discord to give us some questions. This is something, AC, that I would like to do more of.
Yeah.
And you all gave us some really good ones. I'm going to read this first one from Stephen Hilger, host of Into the Aether on Discord. He asked, there's lots of media rooted in the question, what if superheroes were part of our real society? Thinking of stuff like Watchmen, Marvels, The Boys, and even Mystery Men. Among all of these stories that seek to deconstruct superheroes, in your opinion, what helps X-Men continue to distinguish itself and balance being a fantasy world that's also tackling real-life topics?
Wow, where do I start, Matt? I mean, I think there are two places that I want to go that my brain went immediately, right? One is X-Men has always been grounded in the real world, has always been grounded in reality. It stands apart from other comics because it said our main character, one of our main characters, our main villain, we are going to put his backstory is a backstory that you are very familiar with, right? It is the backstory of the Holocaust, right? And it is not a fictional Holocaust. It is not, anything other than the context that you are familiar with. And I guess Captain America kind of does this too, but Captain America does fictionalize the Nazis. And obviously Magneto and Hydra have run-ins. That's not what I'm saying, right? But like the fundamentals of this story are rooted in the real history of this country, right? And also, more than any other superhero story, in my opinion, especially of this era when X-Men was first being published, it was always intended as allegorical. And this is the other thing for me, right? Is that it is fundamentally rooted in and a story of the other, right? Whereas other superhero stories like may touch on the themes of I am different and I feel bad about being different, right? That is much more likely to be the exception rather than the rule of the narrative. The rule of the narrative for the X-Men is it is fundamentally about otherness. It is fundamentally about exclusion. It is fundamentally about what do we do in a world that hates us when all that we want to do is help. And so, I think that helps root it in the real world because that is such a relatable experience for so many marginalized communities. I mean, I think that's part of why it's such like, if you like X-Men, I'm going to just put money on you being gay. And like, I'm going to be wrong sometimes for sure, but like it's pretty likely, right? Like this is maybe a story that you first connected with in comics if you are queer when you were getting into comics because of that connection, right?
Yeah. At the very least, a queer person is more likely to click with X-Men than Captain America.
I mean, dat ass, but also yes.
Yeah, I think I agree with you and some of the stuff I said before where like it manages to do the thing and also commit to the superhero bit. I also think that, I don't know, specifically Stephen, comparing it to the examples that you gave, I think with the exception of Marvel's, we've just seen the capitalist system like continue to pump out X-Men stories where like they're still making some Watchmen stuff like here and there, but like not in the same way that we see X-Men, right? The Boys is currently hot. I'll be interested to see what legacy it has. I say that those are not bad properties, right? Like I think The Boys is a little too on the nose sometimes. That's why I don't watch a lot of it. But I think fundamentally the idea is sound and is really cool. I reread some of Marvel's yesterday and remembered like how good that story is and what it's doing. But I think it misses a little bit of the thing that you were just talking about. Watchmen is interesting, but it's almost a commentary outside of the medium, right? It is itself a comic book, but it's stepping away and commenting on the medium through the medium. And in doing so ends up commenting on the real world, but not in the same exact way that X-Men does.
Yeah. I mean, and I do think the other thing, and this is like just classic AC behavior right now. I do think that the other thing is that all of those other stories, even Mystery Men, which is fundamentally a comedy, right, are extremely cynical. They are extremely cynical takes of what you will do when handed the kind of power that could make a difference at the individual level, right? And so I think the other thing about X-Men is for all of the setbacks and all of the conflict and all of the moments where, where Magneto was right? Like it is ultimately a story about hope and belonging, right? It is ultimately a story about finding your place with other people who think and care about you, right?
Yeah.
Like it is also ultimately a story of hope because whether you fall into regardless of what sort of political ideology you fall into about how the X-Men should be or where they should wind up or what kind of power they should have in society, it is fundamentally, I don't know, about achieving something greater than one's self, right? Even Magneto, for his selfishness and his outlook of the world, is not singular, right? He is hopeful for a communal world for mutants.
Yeah, and I think that like that. I mean, you mentioned Magneto is right as like an example of some of the not great parts, but I think that's the fundamental message by Magneto was right, is that like Magneto gave a shit and he actually took action for us, like for this community, right? And that's why people treat him as a cultural figure in these stories and why that slogan catches on and why Quentin Quire wears it in that one panel and why that's so famous. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Do you want to get this next question?
Yeah. So this next question comes from Rob.I on Discord. Rob asks, Matt, what makes for a good story in Krakoan era X-Men?
I think the number one sort of like foundational necessity for a Krakoan story is that it has to be in some way about the uniqueness of the Krakoan experiment. It's not a guarantee to make a good story, but I think it's a fundamental requirement. I think some of the worst stories in the Krakoan era ignore this. Some of them have it and just have other things going wrong, but the ones that really sing to me are rarely missing this element, right? Hickman's X-Men line is fundamentally about what do we do after we build this place. I really love all of the Betsy Braddock and Apocalypse stuff in Krakoa. So there's these series called Excalibur and Knights of X and Betsy Braddock, Captain Britain. And the thing that these stories bring, they're based in Otherworld. They're literally based in a place called Otherworld, so they are not based on Krakoa, right? But the reason they exist and the thing that's unique is that they're fundamentally based on the fact that Excalibur is based on the fact that Apocalypse is treated like anyone else, right? His amnesty means something because of what he brings to Krakoa and introduces a power to them that they wouldn't have had if they didn't do that. Betsy Braddock, Captain Britain, is about what it means to represent a nation that doesn't want you.
Yeah.
She is Captain Britain because of magical and lore reasons. She's not Captain Britain because Britain cares about her. In fact, they hate her, and the racists that are running things don't want her to be Captain Britain. They want her brother, who has been Captain Britain for years and who's like the good old boy, to take that spot instead. In fact, everyone that's not a mutant kind of wants that. And add on the fact that, she has a girlfriend that is Rachel Summers, right? Like, add on the fact there's the Captain Britain core, and we're introduced to these wild, crazy variations of Betsy Braddock, like the T-Rex and the goose that are Captain Britain. Like, that's all really awesome. And in fact, speaks to the other thing that I think works about Krakoan stories, which is ensembles. Steven will love that. He loves ensembles in video games. But I think that the best Krakoan stories have like really solid characters, but specifically that are forced to interact with each other in some way. Excalibur is about a team. Hellions is about a team of like the worst people you could put on a team, and Mr. Sinister. Like, it's also one of the best. Like, it's one of the best books in the whole era. Yeah, that's my take.
Hell yeah.
I would say the other thing that I kind of looked for was some kind of massive world-changing something. It's not a hard requirement, but I think some of the best books do that. Ten of Swords was not a single book. It was kind of an event that happened through several books, but manages to introduce some complications to Krakoa that are really interesting. I think me liking Ten of Swords is kind of a hot take. I'm not exactly sure, but I really enjoyed it.
A hot take? Ooh.
You just get to see people with cool swords the whole time. It's neat.
Listener, if you hated Ten of Swords, get in the comments.
But stuff like that. Trial of Magneto, which, again, spiking into the UN scene.
Yeah.
It's a callback to some of that happening in the comic books, and it fundamentally reshapes how Resurrection works on Krakoa. So,
yeah. Well, I think that this is, like a good next question. Do you want to introduce this question? I think there's some context here I'm missing.
Sure. Yeah, totally. So this question is from the person named Yrdad, who has not been named Yrdad on the Discord in a while. They most recently were known as Brolatro and are currently known as Bradley. I don't know what's going on there. Your dad asked, what are y'all's dream X-Men lineups? AC, do you have any answers to this?
I guess like this is where I like my hashtag basic nature comes out, which is that
go basic, because I'm gonna be the fucking indie nerd over here.
I mean, I think that I absolutely adore, and I don't know if I think that Nightcrawler should be the leader, but like if you've learned anything from about me from this podcast, it should be that Alan Cumming is my favorite. And but I do really like Nightcrawler as a character overall, and think that the animated series and the movies haven't like given Nightcrawler as much screen time as I would have wanted him to have. Probably from there, I do really love Cypher. Let me think about this. For sure, Nightcrawler and Cypher, and let me get some
I can
some
give my
in there.
my team. So obviously my leader is Magic. There's no way that I create an X-Men team where the leader is not Illyana Rasputin.
Yeah.
She's rad. I really love her characterization in Midnight Suns specifically. But I also think there's another question, I believe, by your dad later that is about the best book. But one of my favorite books in the Krakoan era is The New Mutants. The first run, it kind of gets messy later on. And the way that magic exists in that series is really cool. They do this short story in a later run with her that's like kind of 3 issues long. I was just like, I was in love with it. She's really cool.
Does Scarlet Witch count as an X-Man?
You're asking the question. Boy, I think you can, if we're imagining a world where we are getting to creative direct or write a book, you can do whatever the fuck you want.
Scarlet Witch, number 1.
I mean, AC, if you're going to retcon Scarlet Witch as a mutant again, you can go write a book today.
Okay.
I will take it.
Okay, sorry, I interrupted you.
You're fine. I also want to choose Doug Ramsey, Cypher. He got such a glow up in Krakoa, and I love everything about Doug. I think Inferno, not the old Inferno with Madeline Pryor, but Inferno, the Krakoan Inferno, is kind of the midpoint of the story, and he has a pretty critical role there. And also, some stuff happens to him at the end of Krakoa that's really interesting. Less agency for him, but I think he could be a really cool team member. Also, I put Doug's big wife, Bay the Blood Moon. In Ten of Swords, he is forced, his like battle is that he's forced to marry Bay the Blood Moon to save Krakoa. Like, and so he marries Bay the Blood Moon, and they have a wonderful relationship, even though his power is understanding languages and codes, he cannot understand her. Like, that's the fundamental conflict there, and I think that would be an incredible dynamic on an X-Men team. She shows up in the book Realm of X, which is during Fall of X. I didn't like it. I read 1 issue and put it away. My other 2, I think, are pretty clear follow-ups here, which are Betsy Braddock and Rachel Summers. Put the lesbians together, please, and thank you. And I also would love to see Betsy be on a team where she's not leading. I want to see what that does for her and Rachel's relationship, especially with Rachel has this whole relationship to the Phoenix. She's known as Ascani. Again, it doesn't matter. This is how they solved the dying another world problem. But they both have such pivotal roles to like X-Men lore that I would love to see them just as like a couple that are like also really like hard fighters.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I also love that I have 4 women on this team.
I mean, it's saying something. Part of what I was trying to think of was like, oh, my team wouldn't be all the dudes. And then I was like having to spend some time thinking about like, okay, if the dudes aren't on my team, who's on my team? And so now I think I've landed in like Scarlet Witch as my leader, Storm, although Storm is arguably a great leader, Nightcrawler, Cypher, and Kitty Pryde.
Oh, I'd take it.
Yeah.
I'd read that book.
Yeah.
I think Scarlet Witch is really interesting. I think if somebody was writing this book, could do really cool stuff in the how does Scarlet Witch find her way back to the X-Men?
Yeah.
She has clearly a long history there, and I frankly am eager to see Marvel do something about reconciling her more than more than repairing her image. Right. With the mutants, like that's good, that's huge. But I would love to see her fundamentally like be retconned as a mutant again, her and her brother. Actually, this is making me think that I might put Polaris on my team as well. The other Magneto daughter. So.
I mean, I think that one of the things that made me think that is I really, really enjoyed the storyline or the moments. I guess it wasn't even really a storyline, but the moments in X-Men 97 where you got like Jean Grey and Storm calling each other sister, and like
Yes.
the really like the big moments of connection there. And I think that Storm would be a really interesting character to, as a character who is often like reticent to welcome people back into the fold, would make a really interesting like foil for that against Scarlet Witch, and then like would be excited to see where they wound up eventually.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see Storm as like just a person on the team again, because in the comics she has not been that person for a long time. In fact, in the thing that comes after Krakoa, they're elevating her out of the X-Men into the Avengers, into like a political role.
Yeah, interesting.
You want to get this next one?
Yes. Okay. Our next question comes from Eric's Corn Overload. 2-part question. Part 1, not influenced by part 2. So part 1 only right now. 3 favorite X-Men, go.
Betsy Braddock. Specifically Betsy Braddock, after she and Quanon have swapped bodies back. There's so much cool shit that goes on there. Magic, 1,000,000%. There's no way it wasn't magic. There's so many people flying through my mind right now. I'm gonna go with Kurt, Nightcrawler. He just says, from the stuff that I've read, he was like my second favorite in Krakoa. He like his whole story's like it always is about religion, but is no longer about like Catholicism and penance and stuff. It is more about, we have reshaped the world. What does that mean for spirituality?
Yeah.
Right? And it's real good. And like the answers they land on are sick.
Hell yeah.
So
okay. Nightcrawler also in my top 3. Rogue in my top 3. I think like Rogue is my character that I can just like never let go of. She is very much like one of my like cornerstone, knew I was gay because of how obsessed I was with Rogue.
Me and Nightwing.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like I had those like the books that would like teach you how to draw the comic book characters, and I just drew Rogue over and over again. Okay, Nightcrawler, Rogue. And honestly, okay, this feels a little controversial, but I do think that my third favorite, who is for sure an X-Men, no questions, is actually Emma Frost.
Oh, she's up there for me.
Yeah.
Like, was very close to being on my list.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, AC, fuck, marry, kill, your top 3.
Shit. I forgot that was the second part of this question. Shit. I wanted to say that I was going to kill Iceman. I hate Iceman.
Oh, man.
That's okay. That's just me. Okay. Wow, this is really tough. I think it's... Oh, God. This is so upsetting. I think that it is fuck Rogue, marry Nightcrawler, kill Emma Frost.
Yeah, I see it. I think that feels right. I also already know my fuck, marry, kill.
Mm-hmm.
It is fuck Magic, marry Betsy Braddock, and kill Nightcrawler.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry, Kurt.
Yeah, I think the thing is that Kurt and I would get along for the longest term. And when I think about marriage as a commitment, I love Emma Frost. And also she is
She's
to be on the nose,
anyway.
She's a frigid bitch sometimes. And that's her whole deal.
Yeah, it's her whole thing.
That's her whole deal.
Yeah. Incredible.
Also, sorry, just because we haven't talked about it at all, speaking of Emma Frost, the moment in X-Men 97 where they find her in the wreckage of Genosha and she is like turned into a diamond, and you get that incredible moment of I forgot to even talk about this during X-Men 97, but some of the one-liners in 97 are so good.
They're so good.
Like she's like, I've always been good under pressure, and she literally turned her body into a diamond. And then also when Bastion says, "You mutants have been plaguing me since 92." Is like so funny.
Oh my God. Yeah. The crazy thing about that is that in the comics, like that's exactly how she got her powers.
Yeah.
Like her secondary power, rather. She was always like a psychic and whatnot, but the way that her secondary mutation happened was exactly that storyline. And that was a Grant Morrison thing. They kind of invented this idea of secondary mutation. Beast looked like a cat for a little bit, but they kind of retconned that away.
Aww. I should have married Hank.
I would advise against it, frankly.
Fair
Some
enough.
shit
Yeah,
goes
that's true.
down.
Okay. Matt, a comment from our friend MattPrinceComics from Threads was wanting to share a tidbit about this, revisiting these 2000s Bryan Singer X-Men films, and wrote in and said, as I've gone back and revisited most of them, I have to say that First Class is the best team movie they ever did. It's a proper X-Men movie that balances all the characters and speaks to the central themes while having fun with it all. McAvoy and Fassbender are heartbreakingly good together. Just the fact that we have a 60s period piece X-Men is kind of unbelievable. And yes, 100%. Let them kiss. Let them kiss.
I remember watching this movie with you in Castle House.
Oh my God, we watched this movie together?
Yeah, we watched this movie. You had seen it in theaters, but we watched this movie together at Castle House. And I remember thinking a lot of these things like this. I can't believe they made this movie.
Yeah. It is also, I think, so I am not a person who thinks, obviously, I'm not a person who thinks that superhero movies can't be good movies. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the other things about First Class, is First Class is just a good movie. It is a good period piece from the 1960s. The set dressing is extremely good. The costuming is extremely good. It is just a good movie. And also, it's a very good X-Men story, too.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to get these last two? Because I think they're both directed at me.
Yes, they are. Okay. So Eric's Corn Overlord here once again with another question for you, Matt. Are you feeling better about the upcoming changes to the X-Men line now that Krakoa has an ending?
Yeah, I think because of the way Krakoa ended, I feel a lot better. I still feel pretty bored when I look at some of the stuff that's coming out of it. To give a quick breakdown, there's 3 books. There's what gets jokingly referred to as adjectiveless X-Men, and that one's with Jed MacKay. It is a team that Scott's leading out of Alaska. It gets set up at the end of X-Men 35. And there is a book that I am quite excited for that's written by Gail Simone, which is going back to Uncanny X-Men. And then there's this new book called Exceptional X-Men that features Kitty Pryde and Emma Frost, which is being written by Eve Ewing. The setup sounds boring to me, honestly, but it's Eve Ewing.
Yeah.
So I'm probably going to read them all. I have them all on my subscription at my comic book shop.
Yeah.
We'll see. I'm going to give it a shot. I was really worried about the end of Krakoa, and frankly, I had right to be worried. But they pulled it together.
Yeah.
So I imagine that I will end up subscribing to 1 or 2 of these books pretty consistently. I'm the most worried about Jed MacKay, though. We'll see. And the slate was kind of wiped so clean that literally any story can be told. So
we love a reset.
Yeah. I think that's honestly part of my problem with it is I do love comics, but they sure do the same thing over and over again.
Yeah. I mean, not to hark back on going back to X-Men 97, but one of the things that I enjoyed about X-Men 97 was it wasn't an origin story. Yeah. And that was a gift to us all.
Yes.
Okay. Your dad asks, do y'all feel like the mutant metaphor was represented well throughout the Krakoan era? How do you feel it stood up under the weight of having to discuss minority communities, the importance of those, and the survival of such communities? Do we feel like it was a good representation of these things?
Yeah. So this is where I put the pin in earlier, because I think it was, and I think it does. Krakoa to me is a dream, but it's also a story about the reality of that dream. So the last issue of House of X Powers of 10 ends with this moment. There's this huge party. Everyone's celebrating. It's got the famous panel of Wolverine and Jean and Scott kind of looking like they're about to go fuck. But it ends with this coda that's kind of we still have a lot of work to do, right? We talked about earlier only being able to recreate the things we know. And, I said earlier that they immediately go reinvent Super Person. I just finished playing this game and 20% of the audience is going to cheer. I just finished playing this game 1,000 Times Resist, and that game is about cycles of violence. It's about viewing resistance in this more broad way where we include familiar rebellion alongside actual like activist resistance, right, against oppression. And it kind of asks the questions like, we won, but now what? And I won't spoil that game, but what I will say is that like we saw this side of the story and the way that Krakoa continued. One of the like most radical acts of Krakoa is the amnesty of villains. That panel of Xavier shaking his hand after he comes through the gate. The fact that they fucking took him to Davos as like a representative, right? That pays off in some really cool ways, but also ends up being something that fucks them over.
Yeah.
Like, I think in some ways the original sin, but also the original kind of magic of Krakoa was that amnesty.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to have to forgive Sinister to do the thing you say you're going to do. And also Sinister's going to be the thing that tries to end you.
Yeah.
It's kind of the fundamental issue of the experiment. And I think that with obvious like exceptions, those kinds of problems exist in the real world. And in the fights against oppression and in minority communities. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what else to say other than that I do think it lands because it asks the next step of questions.
Yeah. I think the other thing that, like, from having now read House of X, Powers of 10, like, one of the other things that I think does represent this well is the bureaucracy of it all, right? That they do really get into, even as they're creating Krakoa and negotiating, and like, you know, it's really laid out in House of X, right? This like Magneto at the UN, right? Like having to go through those traps of arguing for your legal rights while also envisioning a world that is beyond legal rights. And so like, I think that there is something really unique here, but I also like, I think that one thing that I observed as being really just sort of, I don't know, I think I am at a point in my readings of things where I just want it to be more explicit, right? Like, I think that the
X-Men 97 does not turn you
right,
down on
exactly, for sure. And that's part of why I loved it so much, right?
Yeah.
Like, I really loved and enjoyed the complicated storytelling and the complications that a story so reliant on time travel and no space and other world can be. But I do think that takes it out of the story, to like out of that metaphor to some extent, right? Yeah. Because it takes away that really key rooting. And so it doesn't quite get me to where I want to go on its own. The thing that drives it for me is like my reading of the text, my understanding of this as that kind of story, and how that roots my experience of like engaging with that piece of media.
Yeah, this to me is an issue with later Krakoan books. I will not drag Jerry Duggan, but I would. I think he doesn't abandon, but he is not as good at bringing some of that to the forefront as he is of doing the superhero thing. Yeah. You know, like he's real good at making the people fight each other. Questionable if he's good at that. There was one issue that I read and I loudly complained. I was like, your characters are describing the actions they're taking. Like, what are we doing here? But I don't know. I think he might be good at world building and like setting that kind of stuff up. But like, I feel like maybe that should have been his job and not like the writing of the comics, because what he ends up missing is some of that stuff, and he loses it for the no places and the other worlds and the dominions and stuff like that, which those things should support that kind of storytelling in the way that I think Hickman really lands in those like first 12 issues, 10 issues. Yeah,
I agree.
Well, that has been another take at the X-Men in the light of X-Men 97. This is a quite long recording for us.
Listen, we've got a lot to say about X-Men, okay?
Yeah. Hopefully it's another, 2 seasons before we come back here with X-Men. Yeah. But honestly, hopefully for me, it's not. Like I hope season 2 of X-Men 97 comes out tomorrow.
Yeah. Actually, Matt, this is now an X-Men podcast. podcast. No, I'm just kidding.
That's the joke again that Girl Mode make all the time. They're like, we're going to accidentally become an X-Men podcast because their most popular episodes are X-Men episodes.
That's so funny. Well, thanks for sticking in with us as you listen to another roughly 2 hours of our thinky thoughts about the greater X-Men universe. Oh, God, do I have to say the Marvel Cinematic Universe now when I talk?
You don't.
Great, cool.
You don't, in fact. But hey, if you want to see more writing about the X-Men, check out my website, matthorton.live. I tried to do this thing where I wrote through all of May with someone on the Discord, and I got like through the 11th and just kind of abandoned that idea.
Incredible.
But I did a lot of writing, and I did like a little tiny piece about Bo DeMeo on there. And
hell yeah.
I don't know. I'll link the one about how to read Krakoa in the show notes.
Awesome.
What about your website?
Oh, shit. I have a website. You can go to my website, acfacci at acfacci.com, and there is stuff on there. It's mostly about the podcast, which you can find at can'tletitgo.gay.
That is correct. You can find us at can'tletitgo.gay. That is also our handle on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. And may I say, we have been doing a good job.
Yeah.
I'm really proud of us.
We're really, coming into our own. We're figuring it out. Matt is being really nice, and I just am getting my shit together. Is really what's happening.
I am not. You have had so much going on.
Listen, so. I know.
Hey, check out the network as well. You can find the network at theworstgarbage.online. That is where we have our Discord, where you can also find places to hang out, not to talk with us, but to talk with people that like shows like .zip, Frog of the Week, Into the Aether, Paws and Claws, and Video Game Podtimism, or maybe even some of the defunct shows, 11 Again, Asynchronous, and No Script at All. Who knows? Maybe you're a fan of one of those by chance. Shout out to the people that help make the show. That is Scout. She made our art. You can pay her to make you something at, let's go ko-fi.com/humblegoat, ko-fi.com. And also Pragmatism on Twitter for our music.
Yeah.
And I think that's it.
Hey, next time I won't spoil the surprise, but we're very excited for what we have in store. And if you're the special person listening to this, you know who you are. Can't wait to have you on the show.
The short story is I'm going to Colombia, so I won't be here next time. But somebody else will.
Yeah.
All right. We'll talk to you next time.
Bye.
TWG, the worst garbage, online.